There aren't any happy endings in Game of Thrones, so why are you making me like these characters so much and want happy endings for them? It has been 7 years. 7 years and 9 months, if you can believe it, since that atrocity of a series finale of Game of Thrones was aired. It has also been 7 years and 9 months since I have seen a single piece of content in the Game of Thrones universe. I've not read any books. I have not rewatched the series in any capacity. I did not watch House of the Dragon because I was still holding a grudge over what they did to that series. You know, I was a huge fan of Game of Thrones. I'm pretty much a former fan, emphasis on former. But I started hearing a lot of interesting stuff about Night of the Seven Kingdoms. And what really got me, what really kind of hooked me and got me interested in the show is somebody had said that it's a much lighter version of Game of Thrones. Like, it's still in the Game of Thrones universe, but it's much more lighthearted. And I think that's something that is actually really true throughout the whole series. There's a lightness to it and almost a wholesomeness and a humor to it that was really just lacking in the original series and presumably in House of the Dragon, which I never watched because I was still holding a grudge. We'll see if maybe that changes, but man, I'm still burned on that series finale. I'll be honest with you. I took a shot on Night of the Seven Kingdoms and I really liked it. Do I think that it is epic level, Game of Thrones style content? No, I don't. But I do think that it is fun and it is entertaining. Wouldn't say that it's family friendly, but there's definitely this lightness to it that I actually can appreciate after so much, after Game of Thrones was such a heavy, heavy series. So if you haven't seen it, Night of the Seven Kingdoms, it's basically like the movie A Knight's Tale with Heath Ledger. I love that movie. I think it's this feel-good kind of sports action movie with some romance mixed in. A lot of people will say it's just a chick flick, but like, what do you want from me? I'm a chick. Sue me. But anyways, the basic plot is the same, which is there's a knight that has died and his squire wants to basically kind of carry on his mantle and enter into these jousting tournaments to make something of himself, to earn money, to earn fame, to earn glory.
I've waited my whole life for this moment.
You've waited your whole life for Select to himself to death.
But the catch is you can only compete in these tournaments if you're a knight. So here's kind of like the difference in A Knight's Tale versus Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which is that Heath Ledger's character basically pretends to be a knight for the entire tournament circuit. And that's sort of like the secret that he's harboring, that's kind of like, mounting the stakes as you go along through the movie. Whereas in Night of the Seven Kingdoms, Sir Duncan is stating that he has been knighted by his former knight that he squired for and has to prove that. And so he's kind of on this quest to prove to everyone that he is a knight and can joust in the tournament. What really does kind of break open this series, though, is that it's told from the perspective of somebody who is coming from nothing. In Game of Thrones and, presumably House of the Dragon, we are so focused on the people at the top. We are so focused on the royalty and the political games that they're playing with each other for power. But there's entire empires, there's entire kingdoms, and all of these stories underneath them. And you really start to understand the universe, the whole world in its entirety, and what life was really like. So there's this whole fresh scope of the Game of Thrones universe, of medieval times, that we haven't really gotten in the other series. And I really appreciated that. I really think it's a wonderful story to tell of somebody who is coming from mediocrity, who's coming from obscurity, who's trying to build himself up from nothing. And that genuine earnest really comes through in the characters. And this is really, I think, the strongest point of the show is the characters. When you ask what makes a good character, right? You have to look at a couple of different elements. One, the biggest thing obviously is their struggle. What is their struggle? What is going to lead to their character arc? What is Sir Duncan's struggle? Dude's a nobody. He squired under some obscure knight that nobody remembers. He's got no money. He's barely got any horses or equipment. He doesn't even have armor. This dude just wants to make something of himself so badly. And you can see that in the writing over and over again in all these different instances where you know, he's just struggling to get anyone to remember the name of his knight, Sir Arlen, I think it was. And then there's like, you know, just a whole scene where he's talking to the Targaryen's Kingsguard, and just the way that he perks up when one of the Kingsguard is like, oh yeah, my whole family just is crabbers. I come from a family of crabbers. And he's like, well, if the son of a crabber can rise up to be the Kingsguard, then maybe I can too. It's like he's so desperate to be something, to serve something greater than himself, and to really just go down in history as someone who did kind deeds, as someone who is memorable for the things that he has done and the things that he's achieved. And that is so pronounced within this character and within his struggle that he just, it's like trying to start a fire and he just is like rubbing two sticks together, and the rain keeps on coming or something else keeps happening to him. And you see what his character is like in the face of adversity. And then there's also just like dimensionality too, right? Like, yes, you can have a character with a trait, but if you give them just one trait and you don't give them multiple traits, then you're going to end up with a flat character, and you're going to end up with more like tell than show. You see this with Rey in Star Wars all the time. Well, you know, she's struggling to find out where she came from. That's her arc, or that's her, you know, journey that she's trying to, her mystery that she's trying to unravel. And she's also very kind, and it's like, and she's really good at doing Jedi stuff. And you're like, okay, what else? What else? Well, she's really kind. Oh, she's really good at technology. These are not like character traits. They're just skills that they gave her to, you know, push the plot forward, not to actually flesh out any type of character. You know, with Dunk, you've got this gentleness. You see this nuance in him where, you know, he's kind of gruff with Aegon at the very beginning when he thinks he's just a stable boy, but the way that he is so kind and sweet to his horse, even when he has to sell her and give her up, you know, you can kind of see that softness and that vulnerability in him. And you really see it in episode 5 with the whole, you know, fight of 7, in that whole flashback scene where he is just, he's more gentle. He's trying to think of other people before himself. And his girlfriend in that whole flashback, she's much more hardened. She's much more cynical about everything. And she also just wants to explore the world. She wants to get out and find something better for herself. And Dunk is very provincial. He's like, well, what if my mom comes back? What if we miss something here? And, you know, you can kind of get this sense that a character is more fleshed out, that has fears, that has anxieties, that has insecurities, and is quantifiably different from other characters who may be good or bad or morally gray, like his girlfriend was. But then you also really clearly have laid out how brave he is too. I mean, and it's not just in, you know, the decision to fight the Battle of 7 or the Trial of 7, but it takes balls to walk up to the Targaryen family themselves and ask them to vouch for him, just to be able to compete in the tournament before you even get to the violence and the stakes of the tournament. If he loses the tournament, he loses everything. He loses his horse. He loses armor that he doesn't even have. He's just like, he had to sell one of his horses to buy the armor that he could very well use. You're talking about just a person who is going blindly into, this is what I have to do to get to the next level. And he's not thinking about, he is thinking about all the ways that it could go wrong, but he is persevering in spite of that. And then to look at the other main character in the series, Aegon, there is not only, you know, this sort of like uncle, nephew, older brother, younger brother, mentor, mentee dynamic that the two of them have, but they really took an effort to flesh out Egg as well. You know, he's so much smarter than his age. You just kind of see it in his demeanor. It's like the way that he goes out of his way to train the horse for the tournament, the way that he understands the dynamics and the politics and the backgrounds of everything. You can tell that he is just paying attention. And this is also probably part of in the writing and the acting, the directing of this, but the way that he carries himself as a character, that speaks magnitudes. You know, there's this attitude that he has that's very quiet and it's very observant, but he's not meek. You know, he admits that he's scrawny, and this is one of his character arcs. This is one of his struggles that he has to overcome. He's bullied. He's scrawny. It's easy for him to be kind of pushed around. And I think that that's where he's naturally drawn to someone so gentle like Dunk. And they really finish off that dynamic very quietly, very subtly, but you get their connection. But just going back to how like royal he is in his stature, you get this from the very beginning when he's the stable boy. And if you knew anything about the series beforehand, you knew what Dunk didn't know at the beginning, which was that he is a Targaryen, he is a prince. And so there is this level of dramatic irony that's going on where this character, Dunk, has no idea of the kid that he's actually dealing with. In the very first instance, he thinks he's just a stable boy, and he's like, here, take my horse, don't mess it up. And you can just see in Egg's demeanor that he just kind of stands there sometimes when he's being talked to like a stable boy, like a commoner, and he doesn't react to it. Obviously, that would be counter motivational because he is seeking out these instances. He wants the obscurity. That's why he shaved his head. But there's also no sort of like smirking. There's no like, I know more than you do kind of attitude. There's no amusement behind it. It's just, oh, so this is how stable boys get treated. That's interesting. It's a really, again, like it's a very quiet thing that's done partially in the dialogue and partially just in the nuance of the acting and the directing and the relationship that the two of these characters have, which is really cool. But also, it's such a good example of when the scene itself is treated as a piece of art, as opposed to the means to the end. When you look at bad content, sometimes with woke content, but just generally when you're looking at bad content, there is so much telling and not enough showing. We see this with the Star Wars sequels again, like with somebody like Rey, where they're just telling you what happens and they're giving you a scene in order to tell you the thing that you have to know so that you can get to the next part of the plot. This show, in contrast, treats every scene like it is a piece of art to be sculpted. There are beats within each of the scenes. There are emotional moments. There's dialogue and there is acting to convey emotion in every single scene. When you have the scene where Dunk has to go sell his horse to pay for his armor, you have this quiet moment where he's connecting with her, and he even gives the guy who buys her a little bit of extra money, and he's like, make sure she gets, a bushel full of apples tonight. Like, there are these things that advance the plot and move things forward, but they're crafted in such a way to make you savor each moment of the show. Now to the big question: how much did I like this show? Is this the best show on TV right now? I think it's really good. I really enjoyed it. I think it's just it's fun, sweet. It's a wholesome element to the Game of Thrones universe, like I said, that we were missing before, where it feels like you can actually slow down and get attached to characters that at least aren't going to face a brutal ending anytime soon. Let's hope. Let's just keep our fingers crossed there. I wasn't foaming at the mouth to find out what was going to happen in the next episode, but I wanted to find out. I wanted to find out enough to make me come back and keep watching. So that's a really good sign. However, there are some critiques that I think that we should talk about, because although this series is fantastic, I have a few criticisms, primarily the pacing. I'm going to be honest with you guys. There was not a lot going on here. I mean, truthfully, it took us 4 episodes to get to the reveal that Egg was Prince Aegon Targaryen. That took way too much time. I feel like we could have gotten to that reveal at the end of the 2nd episode somehow. We also spend the entire time trudging around this fair, waiting for the tournament to start. I feel like the tournament would have been over by now. And that's really kind of a bummer, because I was really looking forward to some more gruesome or some more just like really action-packed scenes of the joust, of the tournament itself. Just like the scene where, Aerion kills his opponent's horse. Like, I was waiting for a lot of that. And that is what you get a ton of in The Knight's Tale, because it's tournament after tournament after tournament. It's him building up his skills to fight in the tournament. The other thing that A Knight's Tale had that this show kind of really didn't was a proper villain. Yeah, Aegon was a dick. He was just an absolute jerk, and he's the reason for all of the events that ensued with the Trial of Seven, with Prince Baelor's death. So he's certainly a catalyst, I would say, and he's definitely an asshole. The extent of his villainy didn't really get fleshed out because we know how Game of Thrones does villains. We know how evil and how vile its villains can be, and we really didn't get a good sense of that in this series. Now, I feel like this is just sort of like the adventures of Dunk and Egg, and so, maybe we won't quite encounter a big bad Game of Thrones style villain. Maybe this might just be a little bit more of an anthology where it's like, okay, now we move on to season 2 and some of these lighthearted adventures, and then we're going to move on to season 3 if there is going to be a season 3. But A Knight's Tale had a very proper villain. It had an actual bad guy who's an actual jerk who really tried to hurt our main character and who at the end of the movie was actually properly vanquished. There was no moral ambiguity. There was no you find out his backstory and he's actually kind of a good guy. No. Bad guy meets ending. And Aegon he got his ass beat, which was very satisfying, but hopefully there's going to be more to this story. Hopefully we're going to kind of flesh this out a little bit more because you really did get a sense that he was really, truly awful to Egg. So awful to Egg that Egg was ready to kill him. But aside from him really hurting the puppeteer girl and just kind of being a general ass, you don't get much of a sense of his villainy. And I really feel like that was something that we could have added into the show, at least for a season 1. So for me, the show was honestly a little bit light on plot. It had amazing characters. Each scene was so well written. It was so well contrived that you just felt completely immersed in the world and the emotions of the characters who you really get attached to very quickly. It just didn't have a lot going on. And we got to be honest about that. The only other issue I kind of have, and it's just kind of like this unsettling feeling in the back of my mind. It's not a criticism per se, but there's an unsettled feeling I get watching this and feeling lured in by the characters, feeling lured in by the pace, feeling kind of lured in by the gentleness of it, the comedy of it, the adventures of Dunk and Egg, here we go, knowing that it's in the Game of Thrones universe. You know what I mean? We kind of had the sense of adventure. We were building towards something in season 1 of Game of Thrones, and, you really felt like Ned Stark was going to be your main character, and then it's weighing in the back of my mind when the woman came up and prophesied to Egg that he was going to die in a fire and everyone who knows him is going to rejoice in his death. And it's a little bit, it just kind of puts me on edge because in the Game of Thrones universe, if something like that happens, that it's going to come back. And I know, I haven't read any of the books, but I know the generality of the Game of Thrones universe. I know that Egg eventually becomes king. And I know that a lot of people have to die for him to eventually become king. So there is going to be a lot of that. I think, Prince Baelor is just kind of like the tip of the spear here. There's a lot more to come with that. I also know that House Targaryen is going to be on the decline. I know that all of this stuff tends to happen, ending with Aerys the Mad King. So there aren't any happy endings in Game of Thrones. So why are you making me like these characters so much and want happy endings for them? It's just putting me on edge a little bit. You know what I mean, guys? But I do hope that the wholesomeness continues. I'm excited to see what season 2 will bring. But this is another issue that I have. The runtime, just 6 episodes. Again, nothing going on, everybody. There's not a lot happening here. And I understand they had a limited budget, but come on, do something. Make something go, you know what I mean? And then to not have season 2 until 2027. I'm old enough to remember when we were getting 30 episodes of The Sopranos at a time. You know what I mean? Pick up the pace, people. Let's go. Let's keep moving forward with stuff. But I'm not in control of that. I'm not in control of production. I'm just sitting here with my little desk and my little camera and just yelling at the universe trying to make things happen. But all that to say, I really enjoyed this show. I thought it was very well done, even if it was a little bit slow paced. I'm excited to see more of it. I'm excited to see season 2. And who knows, maybe the whole Game of Thrones universe is starting up on its redemption arc. But those are just my thoughts. Would love to know what you guys think in the comments. If you like this video, please like, hype, subscribe so you can get more of my content. Thanks so much, everybody. I'll see you in the next one.